Alrighty, so how do you want to do this? Do you want to just go top to bottom? I guess that's probably the easiest way for us to do, right?
Yep. Yeah, I think let's go top to bottom.
Yeah, so unfortunately we have to review everything because everything that is currently not marked with a question mark is implicitly not null. I just realized it would have been really helpful if my tool would have highlighted reference type, but yeah, I think these are all value types, so they are fine. I believe serialization, info, and streaming context are both structs. They're probably fine.
No. Are you sure?
Probably. Streaming context is a struct, yeah. Serialization. Info might not. That's correct, it's a class.
It's a class, yeah.
Yeah, but totally fair to say that you really want this one.
Just scroll to the right.
I don't think.
Oh, you're still looking at the first one.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't.
I don't know whether there's no div showing, though. Expected the question mark to show up as a div.
Oh, it is showing the question mark in green.
Yeah, but it should be like in the boxes, similar to these guys here.
Oh.
Not sure. Maybe it already was marked like that?
No, I don't think so.
But yeah, none of them are nullable because we can't. And so this guy is. Yeah, it's probably fair to say that everything that is args, like params, for example, probably also going to be similar, right? Question mark, question mark. And I think both binder and culture info are basically effectively called with null already. Seems all reasonable. Yeah, sure.
Create instance is a weird one that it can return null, but
you can pass null as the inner exception, like as one of the inner exceptions. Just wondering.
Yeah, let's just walk this one first. So the return values are. So what does it mean if create instance returns null?
it was for a nullable type, right, Steve? Like if you pass a type of
so
int
a lot of
nullable.
these things are these like corner cases that force us to put question marks. Like if you pass a nullable int to create instance, it'll return null.
Yeah, this is like I was disagreeing on this one for a long time. Gave up. So.
Yeah.
But I mean, like if you're, if you're in a generic method and you have, a generic t, it might be a nullable of int, and then you call create instance to get null.
For me, like the struct is a special case because the struct generally cannot be null, but the nullable struct is kind of different to me. And it's like
right. The problem for me is this feature in general is about helping you catch null reference exceptions, and so it's the corner cases that you're going to miss.
Yeah, but the int question mark doesn't feel like you're ever going to end up with null reference exception, but I might be.
I mean, if you tried to dereference the result of create instance, you would.
I guess, yeah.
I guess it depends on how you call it, right? If you know the types, and you know it's a reference type, you just suppress it, right? Say, yeah, I know better. If the type is an argument to your method, then probably you shouldn't.
It really depends what we're trying to achieve with this whole feature. I mean, if it's like, hand wavy, we're gonna tell you what, for the 80% common case of inputs, what the 80% common case of outputs will be.
So, like, honestly, like, I think it would be better to actually special case this specific thing in the compiler instead of in our code, but I don't have a strong opinion on this.
What do you mean special case it?
Like, basically, like, we mark it as non-nullable, but, like, basically tell the compiler somehow, like, through the attribute or something that this specific thing is special and, like, treated differently.
But what would you want the compiler to do? Do you want the compiler to consider the return value null or not null?
So, like, generally, like when someone checks in the IntelliSense, they would show it as non-nullable, but, like, with this one case where someone passes nullable of something, then I would actually make the compiler treat it as, okay, this can actually return.
So what do you want to
And
do?
what if you were in a generic method that took a T and used a type of T?
Yep.
No, I think honestly, so the way I see this, right? So let's say I call create instance, right? My naive understanding is this never returns null because it would just blow up if the type doesn't exist, right? So I now use this thing, the compiler gives me squiggles, I'm like, what? And then I read the documentation and it says, can be null if called with a nullable reference type. And then I'm like, well, in my case, I know for a fact it's never the case that it's a nullable value type. Also, so I can just bang it away or debug assert it or whatever it is, right? But I think the problem is if you do more special handling, then like the question is just what you want to do, right? I mean, the cases where the compiler can deterministically look at your code and decide with certainty that this is not the case is probably not being very high for some of the methods. And the other problem is that just makes the whole feature excruciatingly complicated, right? And now the question is now, how much special casing can the compiler realistically do when we have, how many APIs do we have in here? I think 12,000 or something, right? So like that's just System Runtime and System.Runtime.Extensions, right?
By the way,
go from there.
Object handle isn't a struct, right? Just double checking.
It can't be, otherwise it wouldn't show up like that.
No, object handle is not a struct.
Yeah, handle to me I've already found a bug like that. So
yeah, the problem is these are all remoting types, so it's basically logically in a remoting handle. That's I think why it's the reference type.
I mean, saving grace is pretty much no one uses this, so it doesn't someone uses activator.create instance of T, then this doesn't matter because there are no question marks there.
Yeah. I think it depends on the context, right? I mean, I think all the ones that take type are probably super general code where you literally have no idea what the T is, right? In which case, yeah, you probably want the nullable. So
I think we need to represent the intent. It sucks that we're gonna add a lot of warnings for the common usage, but
yeah, basically almost all the usages I've seen, I had to put the bug in there. I didn't even see a single nullable, where I had to not put it.
And I totally understand that perspective, but from my perspective, if we're going to start waving our hands and say, well, this could be null, but in the common case it won't be, so we're not going to put a question mark.
Right.
That entirely devalues the feature. I may as well just turn it off.
Yes.
I think also it depends on the API. I think toString, I felt more strongly towards not having a question mark purely because you call it all over the place, right? But these are also not the APIs you call all over the place, right? So even if you have to bang it away, well, that's probably one of your more complicated components that do things like this. And so you probably want to think about that anyways. So I think that's why I would be okay with that. In toString, we convinced ourselves that while toString as a topic is used a lot, the particular method is probably not used that much in the context where you would have to bang it away, right? So, but yeah, we will have customer feedback for those kind of things, but I think we largely have to document reality, right?
I have a question on the tool. For things that aren't highlighted in yellow, green, or red, what does that mean?
Yeah, so I have no idea. You basically talk about the aggregate exception case, right, where the question mark here shows up as not yellow.
Yeah, or app context below.
I am not entirely sure why that is.
I'm more curious about the read-only exception case where it's actually removed and added as the same in their exceptions.
So basically what this tool does, it aligns APIs based on logically the doc ID. So it will align them regardless of question mark or not question mark because they don't change the ID of the API. And then it will basically generate the tokens for left and right and then just div them. So logically the question mark should have showed up as a div. I suspect what ended up happening is that whatever module I have locally already must have had the question mark in it. I'm not entirely sure why that is.
I mean, we're looking at everything anyway, so we kind of ignore the colors.
Yeah. But. Well, it does help, right? Because he's like, oh, there's something nullable in here that would have been useful, but yeah.
Yeah, but in aggregate exception, for example, it is showing the exception array, and it wasn't marked as nullable at all.
Yeah. And also, some of the stuff here, I'm very concerned right now. Why is this showing up as a div at all?
Yep. Anyway.
There is something fishy going on.
Maybe compiler annotated it indirectly or something.
No, the diff is literally over the tokens. I mean, I looked at this like, last probably 2 years ago, but I don't know, maybe Santi's PR broke some invariant in the way the differ works. I don't know, but we'll find out. Yeah, so the aggregate exception case, I mean, clearly we would allow null, right?
For the inner exception?
Yeah.
We don't actually.
And for the whole array, we also don't accept null?
None of the inner exceptions can be null.
No, I meant the array itself.
It cannot be null.
Really interesting. It's a params though. Normally we accept null for params, but I guess yeah.
I mean, if you don't specify anything for params, you get an empty array.
Well, that must be a recent compiler change. Because originally, I think the compiler actually made it null.
If you don't specify,
no, it's always been empty. But what changed a couple of releases ago is we use our array.empty instead of new t sub 0.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah.
I see.
The predicate is.
I mean, this raises an interesting question: is if we ever wanted to loose an aggregate exception to allow inner exceptions to be null, would we consider that a breaking change to change the, to add question marks? Presumably, adding question marks to parameters would not be considered a breaking change.
Yeah, I guess it depends, right? If it's a virtual, it might be, right?
Yeah, if it was a virtual, it would be, yeah.
But I think we generally said, like, depending on the case, you might actually accept it, based on customer feedback, right? So I think eventually I would get to the point where we have high confidence in our annotations and don't churn them anymore, but until we have some more mileage, you probably have to tweak them.
Do you still need to check for null, even if you don't have the question mark on there? Because if somebody else is calling you that's not using the latest compiler?
Yep.
So we didn't when we added these annotations or didn't add annotations, we didn't change any of the exception handling code. If it was throwing before, it's still throwing.
But I mean, anybody writing a new library going forward?
Well,
I mean, it's up to them.
You can still pass down null with using a bank to shut off the compiler. Like even if the consuming API says it is not nullable, you can call that API with null bank, and the compiler will just ignore that.
Yeah, I mean
so I mean, in that case, like virtuals, like it really wouldn't be a breaking change, right? Because somebody still could have passed it null.
Well,
right. The question was changing an input parameter from not
well,
question.
it would be a source breaking change. If someone had written source that overrode a virtual with a parameter, their parameter was non-nullable, and then we made the base parameter nullable, the compiler, when compiling the derived source, would warn.
I see. But it wouldn't be a binary breaking change.
No, right? I mean, none of these are binary breaking changes in practice. But like the thing is, though, before this feature, we couldn't express nullability, right? So I'm 100% certain we at some point broke an invariant, right? We just said, well, it's not represented in the type, so it's fine, right? So like it's more like this gray area of behavior changes that may or may not affect you, and so. The way I see it is that the annotations just express that a little bit better, but in the end of the day, you still have the same discussion. And it seems all fine to me. So far, I'm not seeing anything that is controversial. What does it mean if in app context the base directory is null?
So there was one case, I'm going to have to go look at it now. I think it was when it's hosted or something, it's possible.
Yeah, base directory is reported by the host. So if the host report null, so
Sure.
It comes from native code.
But yeah, practically speaking, you have a base directory somewhere, right? It's just like, was the host too lazy to compute it, or is there an actual scenario where null makes sense?
But it's not necessarily the .NET.exe host, right? Anybody else could have hosted core CLR.
Sure.
When they spun it up, they passed in null for the base directory.
Yeah, but the question is, do we want them to ever return null, right?
No, but like in the Apex example,
so what else are you going to return?
Path, right?
Yeah, because the problem is like this calls app domain base directory, which ends up saying, what is my entry assembly? Get its location and use that. And if that's null, then it returns null. Entry assembly might be null if you are hosted.
Oh, so you're not calling actually the host. You're basically just saying, well, if it's hosted, then I just don't have an entry assembly, so there's nothing I can do.
That's the current implementation, at least.
So in order for us to fix that, we would have to have some host extension point where the host can return the base directory.
But it's like it's any C++ code that's loading up core CLR, and then they can start calling any method, right? They don't have to call a main method.
Right.
Right, which is why you would have to say like the host would have to like the C++ code activating that would have to pass in the data somehow. If they wanted to have that thing not return now.
There is a way host. So it looks like there's some app context based directory that can be set, at least according to this comment. And that'll be used if a host sets it. If a host doesn't set it, then we hit this get entry assembly thing. So basically, if the host doesn't set it and you're hosted, you'll get null.
Yeah.
And target framework name, same logic, right? Because we've inferred from the attribute that's applied to the entry assembly. So if you neither have the attribute or you don't have an entry assembly, we just don't know.
And this is the thing, like this kind of gets to Christoph's point, which is the 99% use case for this, it's not going to be null, but it could be null. So we attribute it as such.
I think this kind of goes like if you see this first pass more as an we actually represent what's going on. And I think the other question is like, should this ever be null, right? Or should we just fix the code that this corner case just can't occur anymore, right? Because I mean, like, how much code have we written that assumes base directory to actually be there? Probably quite a bit.
And just return empty string instead.
No, I'm
like
saying
in this case you could just return empty string and it's not null anymore.
Well, that wouldn't be the right fix.
This would be wrong.
Yeah.
What should it return in the scenario we just said?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think like if you look at the APIs right now, we just document what actually happens, right? But I think another question we should ask ourselves is like, should we just fix the corner case so you always have a valid base directory? Because practically speaking, you have it, you just can't compute it, which is more like if you think of it as a lacking feature or a bug in our extension point.
I still don't get what in that scenario. What should be the base directory? What is the actual value?
Basically, we would say the contract is the host has to set one. The host has to decide what its base directory is, so that apps have the same way to deal with that.
What if you like somehow made it like so it's hosted in the browser and like you don't actually have
right?
In which case you would say the browser. I mean, that's more like the question for the file system in the browser. But if they have one, you could basically say, well, how do you use base directory usually? Well, for loading other stuff, right? You would just say, well, either you can't load any other stuff, in which case the thing never matters, or you say, well, it's whatever the logical root is for your file system instead of a browser, which might be some arbitrary, local settings or whatever.
No, I think what I hear you saying is this is right for now, but in the future we might choose to remove the question mark and then say if the host does not set, the host must set this app context switch.
Yes.
If it doesn't and there's no entry assembly, we will throw.
Yes. It's basically more like the question. So basically now we documented the actual behavior, and I think the other question is, do we like the behavior, right? But that's a very different discussion, yes. I mean, get data seems reasonable if the key doesn't exist. We just don't have data for that.
How can target framework name be null?
Well, same thing. Like you don't have an entry assembly, in which case we don't know what to look for. But even if you have one, you may not have the attribute applied.
Yeah, but it says like the name. This is the name.
So what?
Entry assembly. If it's null, return null. Otherwise, get its target framework attribute.
Yeah.
If it's null, return null. Otherwise, return its framework name. So there's like all these steps.
I see.
Yeah, I think for hosted apps, clearly you know the target framework name because the host is activating the target framework. But for axes, yeah, you kind of screwed because that's, or not axes, but logical axes, right, where the entry point just runs over runtime your own.
There were a bunch of times when we were going through all these, adding these annotations where, I'd see a PR, like I think Miriam sent one, and I was like, how could this possibly be null? Why are you making this null? And then Jan chimed in, well, it says in the docs right here, this could be null.
Yeah.
I've never protected myself against that possibility.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? I mean, most people don't read docs. You only read them when you hit them for the first null, right? And now you read them the first time you hit a warning. So, in a sense, feature accomplished, right? Or mission accomplished.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, for argument exception.
Jesus, we accept null everywhere. Like, param name can be null, yeah, whatever.
Well, we
general,
can take null, and if the message, for example, is null, then I think we just return the type of the exception.
So why they are calling the constructors that take message and passing null in the first place?
Maybe they wanted to pass down the inner exception.
I mean, if you have a default constructor, right? Like, it should be logically the same thing. Like, the default constructor should just call the one param name with null, right? That's logically what you're doing.
It does raise an interesting question, which is, let's say we have argument exception. Kind of to, I think it was Tarek's point, like, well, if you don't have a message in an inner exception, you should be calling the shortest possible constructor. So would we want to push people towards that by, even though these technically can take null, pretending they can't? The flip side is if you do that, people that are passing null are going to get warnings, or people that pass things where the compiler can't tell are going to get warnings.
The problem when you do that is that basically you end up in overloads that look exactly like this one, where you don't have a chain anymore. You basically have, incompatible shapes, if you will, right? Where eventually you run into problems where adding an overload gets fairly complicated, because the question is now, well, will all existing code compile, or are we accidentally binding against something? So basically here, when you say argument exception, you pass null comma null. Mm-hmm. Already not great, right?
I mean, for me, the point would be like if when you derive from this class and you don't actually know if it's null or not, and then you just want to do whatever the base class will do.
Yeah, I mean, overriding is also a problem, or inheritance in general. But I think like I've seen overloads in the framework that did what Steven suggested, and it's usually a pain.
Yeah, to be clear, I wasn't suggesting, I was just highlighting the alternative.
Yeah, I think those all, like, if you think about it, they actually make sense. Just the first time, it's like, really, we accept null param names? But I guess param name can always be null, so might as well be able to pass it in.
Some of them are a little interesting on exceptions, like serialization info. I don't even remember if we check whether it's null in the implementation or not, but we never expect it because it's always provided by infrastructure. So we just say this can't be null, even if technically something might allow it to be.
I don't think we ever check it.
We never check it.
We could always null ref.
Right.
We always just
right.
call on it.
Yeah.
Good thing. Not really.
I have his performance for sure.
So I'm just wondering about the goal here. About
Basically,
are we trying to reduce the warnings that people can come when they enable this nullable, or just we want to make sure that we're providing the strong features that people can spend some more time to enhance it?
So I think the end goal that everyone, for this whole nullable feature, the end goal that I think everyone would agree on is we're trying to reduce a particular class of exceptions and failures that people have in their applications, and doing it via static analysis at compile time. And that means the compiler helps you to understand how nulls flow through your code. And if you, and that means that any library code that might give you back something that's null has to tell you that, and anything that allows you to accept, that can accept null has to tell you that. And the compiler factors all that information in. Where we end up disagreeing, and sometimes I think I'm sort of at one end of the spectrum and Mads is probably at the other end of the spectrum, is how, quote, quote, accurate do our annotations need to be? And I've erred on the side, and I know I've had disagreements with Santi and Christoph and others as well. I've erred on the side of we should be as accurate as possible. If it's possible that something could in any situation hand you back null, we should say so. The flip side of that is it means you're probably going to get more warnings in your consuming code than you otherwise would. So my goal hasn't been to reduce the warnings that people get in their code. It's if someone enables this feature, it's tell them every possible place where they might even have a null issue. And that may be the right approach, that may be the wrong approach. But to me, it's felt like it's what we should be doing from our library perspective.
I think what I like about it, though, originally I was more on the Mads camp of saying, let's make it so that we don't basically drown the consumer in warning messages, because it kind of results in the FX corp phenomenon when people just turn it off entirely because they get frustrated with it. But what is nice about it is that if we have earring on, that's just document reality, we will find APIs that arguably have a questionable contract, right? Like, oh, should this actually be null, or should we make sure we never return null here? Right, like, which is kind of the base directory discussion, right? And if we basically lie and we say, yeah, you can pretend it's not null, then you're effectively sweeping the problem under the rug, when in fact you probably want to either you want to say no, you have to handle null, or you want to say, okay, let's make sure we actually don't produce a null.
Yeah, and then this there's an effort currently underway, sort of a DCR, to add a bunch of attributes that allow us to more finely express the sort of null behavior of these methods. And that's an effort to, all right, well, we've annotated everything sort of in a very conservative way. Can we then use these attributes to be more specific and eliminate warnings in cases where we can actually help the customer to understand, well, even though we say this returns null, you're going to be fine given the inputs that you provided to the function.
Right.
And so that's sort of to Tarek's question, that sort of is about, all right, well, let's help the customer safely drive down the number of warnings they receive.
Right. So what I'm hearing here is like, then we should do the right thing in our code regardless of the warning, and we assume that this attribute is going to help at some point to reduce these warnings. Right?
The way
in some cases.
So the way I see
this is my problem. What I mean, like, going to every case like this, I mean, like, it's not the right thing. I mean, like, we should be
in general, sorry, I just want to say, in general, that is the approach that we've taken. There are a couple gray areas where we've had to make some judgment calls. So, for example, one of the biggest issues with this feature in general is structs. If you say that, if you have a reference field on a struct and you say it's non-nullable, you're lying, because someone can always walk up to any struct and say default of T, and then every reference field on there is going to be null. And so, but is that really helpful or not? So, like with array segment, well, there are cases where you get default created array segments, and so we do have a question mark on the array in array segment. But there's like this interface map struct in reflection, where no one ever creates one of those things using default interface map. They only ever get them unless they're doing something weird out of one of our reflection APIs, which will not return default initialized things. And so there are a bunch of reference fields on that, and we didn't make we made those non-nullable. And so there are these gray areas. 99% of stuff is very clear, and then there's this like 1% gray area where we've had to make some judgment calls.
But I want to add one thing. So I think the other thing to say is, like, if you look at existing code that is already in production, I don't think turning on this feature will find a ton of bugs. You'll probably find bugs, no matter how robust your code base is. But there will always be like some corner cases, right? But there's a lot of like maybe somewhat false positives because the compiler cannot actually understand your code at the level where it actually executes.
Right.
But I think to me the big savings is, imagine somebody writes net new code. You don't have to waste a lot of time on reading the documentation because most of this is now happening at compile time. The compiler already tells you, oh, you're just dotting into something that could be null. So you probably find this bug immediately when you actually run it for the first time, but you don't have to do that anymore. So like I think there is some accumulative effect of productivity savings that just come from when you actually evolving code or you're writing net new code. This is where this feature is, I think, really shining. But I think for existing code, I don't expect that this is going to make your life substantially better, right? It will probably make your life somewhat worse in the beginning because you have to accommodate the feature, but then eventually, as you're evolving your code base, you actually have payoffs. So in other words, if I have an existing app I barely touch, I would never activate this feature because there's like very little value to be gained by that.
So this feature has to be enabled for the whole project you're compiling, or
no? You can do it by source file, which is basically what we did.
So maybe this can be our guidelines about like telling like if you're writing new code, enable this for the new code, but don't enable it for.
Well, today, so when we ship 3.0, the idea is that it's never on. You have to always turn it on
I
yourself.
understand that. Yeah.
And then for 5.0, there's a discussion of whether we should, in the project template, enable it by default. So there would still be, if you have existing code, it would not be on. But if you do file a new project, you get a project that is already enabled.
But I expect at that time, I mean, like while you add a new source file, you enable it for new source, but don't enable it for whatever existed before.
We could do that, but that's like you have a pound nullable enable in every single source file that you create. I'm not sure that's what you want.
Because
because I mean, if you look at an existing
if we
project,
are worried about like a lot of warnings that people can get, I mean, so if we say like yes, I mean, enable this for the new code, and this will be fair about to get this warning in the new code, so you have the chance to
yes, but if you
this.
add a new file to a project, you already have a bunch of APIs with like in your own project which are not annotated, which like you wouldn't gain anything.
Yeah, I think if you add new source files, I think just enabling the new source files, the value will not be very high. Like basically the problem is, as Christoph said, right? You have to annotate your existing code base to actually flow information in some meaningful way, right? This interaction between the new source file and the other system. I would generally say, to me, when I say code, existing code, I really refer to the project as a whole, and you should make this on a project by project decision. To me, the pound nullable is only an intermediary step as you are upgrading your project towards nullable enable, but the end result is always you turn it on for the whole project. I don't think many people will have this half state where.
But this is conflicting with what you said before about like yeah, this is very useful for the new code, and in the same time we're saying no, we should enable it for the older code for people that for any project people working on.
So, no, what I'm saying is that if you have existing code, like as you have a project,
yeah,
you have to make a decision. How often do you touch this? If the answer is very rarely, I would not bother at all. If this is like your production app that you're actively evolving, then take a point in time where you migrate this to be nullable, do it file by file, so you actually drive down the warnings for your project, and once you're done, enable it for the project and remove all the pound nullable across all your source files. It's just in order for you to actually make progress without immediately drowning in 10,000 warnings, that's why you do it file by file. But that is just the process itself. Like eventually, when you're done, you should be at the point where it's enabled for the whole project. You should not have this half-ass in the middle.
It should be a clear guidelines from us.
Yeah. But I think the other thing is like we are the first project that is not Hello World, but we actually tried this, right? I think the Roslyn folks have tried it, but they didn't have enough time to actually drive the annotations throughout their code base. I think as we are finding more code bases where we do this with, I think we learn a little bit more about, okay, what works, what doesn't work. But I think we already have a pretty good understanding of what worked for us. All right, let's keep going because we have only like 12,000 APIs left.
Did they annotate their own APIs in Roslyn?
Sorry, what?
Did you say they annotated their own APIs in Roslyn?
So Roslyn, Jared had this goal that basically the Roslyn team, they generally are very aggressively dogfooding their own features. But the problem is that this is not a feature that you can just, surgically add somewhere. You actually have to go the whole file, and some of the Roslyn files are ginormous, so it's not easy to enable. And they have a lot of stuff where the type itself is ginormous. It's spread over like 25 files. And so enabling like half a type is usually not very useful, right? So you kind of have to, take some time off to actually do it. And they just didn't have enough time doing that.
Just one thing regarding the serialization info. I looked into the sources. We always create a non-null. We always pass a non-null object. So that's fine.
Sorry, to where?
The serialization info,
Yeah.
which you will see over all the
I know
places.
we always pass a non-null one. That's why I was saying, like, we didn't really focus on that at all. I'm not even sure we looked at the implementations. At least I wasn't, because it's never called by our own code.
I mean, quite frankly, I don't even care what we pass in. If all implementations today will null ref when you pass in null, it should not be null, because then the bug is up the chain, right? Like that. Okay. But given that we don't null ref when you serialize, clearly that works.
The binary search with the question mark array.
You mean T question mark open brace close
the
brace?
inner one.
We cannot do that.
This
Because it is a generic.
Yeah, you can't.
Yeah, unconstrained generics can't have question marks on them.
But logically, yes.
So the compiler doesn't accept if it is generic. You cannot.
Yeah, the idea is if you have, let's say you have a list of T,
right.
If you create that as a list of string, then add takes a string. If I create it as a list of string question mark, then add takes a string question mark. But this gets into weirdness in implementations. Like implementing a generic method is weird because the compiler forces you to assume that every T that comes in might be null, because it doesn't know whether it was going to be constructed with a nullable or non-nullable type. But then when you return a T, you can't return null, because again, it doesn't know whether it might have been null or non-null, so it has to assume non-null for results and null for inputs.
Which is not confusing at all. I mean, it makes sense.
This feature it's a really interesting one because it's taken a ton of work across, especially the language team, compiler team, but us as well. And it's like most of the features are like 100% buttoned up. Any feature the language team does end to end, it's like really polished. This one, there are some pretty big gaps. If I say new string array with the nullable feature enabled, that is an array of non-null strings, right? Except when I just said new string array, everything in that array is null.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think for string arrays, we should just pre-populate it with some quotes from Shakespeare. That seems appropriate.
I think you should submit that PR. Ideally, somewhere in the GC, just bury it in there.
Well, the good news is you can't review it on GitHub, so it's all good. It looks like everything here is effectively not null, which makes sense.
Some of these are going to be impacted by the new attributes.
Yeah.
So, for example, the find method that you just scrolled past that returns a T.
Yeah.
This is where if you scroll up, move your cursor like 5 lines up, or like right there. This is one of those interesting cases where at the moment, we lack the ability to express the fact that regardless of whether you use a nullable or non-nullable T, if find doesn't find what it's looking for, it will return null.
Right.
It'll return default of T, rather.
Right.
And we have no way at the moment of expressing that. With the new attributes, there will be a maybe null attribute on the return type here. So that'll basically saying even if you pass in a non-nullable T, this still might return null.
Do you know this will actually show up in tooling? So when I actually instantiate this guy with string, will it then say, yep, it's find of string, but it returns a string question mark? No, probably not, right? We're just doing control flow, probably know that it could be null, right?
I think that's the intent in the extent of time. It would say no matter what you pass in, because it was maybe null on the T, it'll put a question mark on the result.
Oh, really? So it would show up as that in tooling.
That's the intent, like that the attributes would sort of manifest in a reasonable, in the best possible way in IntelliSense.
Yeah, I
Like
think
that's
that would be.
having it be string question mark is more useful than maybe null string. But I don't know if that's actually going to happen for C# 8/VS 16.2 or whatever it is. It might come later.
Yeah, this will also make our reflection APIs interesting if you ever want to expose nullability. But anyway, yeah. Find all, find next.
In general, Emo, though, I don't know how all the attributes are going to be reflected. Like some of them, there isn't a good way with question marks, of expressing what they mean. So I don't entirely know what it's going to look like in IntelliSense.
Yeah, anything that's codependent, it's probably pretty bad.
Exactly. All the maybe, not null when or not null if not null, like all those attributes are going to be weird.
Hold on. So set value, all of those take a question mark, but the one that takes 3 index doesn't.
Yeah, that seems.
Oh, it's like a bug.
It's not.
Sorry, Santi.
Eagle eyes. This is why we have young people here, because the old people can't see the code. What is that?
Is array.
That value. Yeah, those are also the fun ones, hard to find.
This also highlights that, though, that there are 60,000 methods or something in .NET, or or 20,000 in Core. I don't know what it is. There's a really good chance we're going to ship all this stuff and have a few mistakes like this.
Nah. By the way, how does this work with ref and out? They can never be null, correct? Like as in the ref and the out pointer themselves cannot be null, right? They always point to some valid location.
I mean, technically they could be if used on safe code, but from a C# perspective, no, they can't be null. But so the annotations end up referring to the nullness of the thing that's referenced.
Yeah, so when you say ref string question mark, it means it's a reference to something that can contain a string question mark.
Correct. Yeah. Or if you have like a ref string whatever and you put the maybe null or not null or something attribute on it, that's referring to, again, the location, not the reference to the location.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether we need a ref question mark or an out question mark or some insanity like this to model the null case, but I don't think we ever cared. Yeah.
In a weird way, the generic types were the easier ones because there was just way less stuff to have to pay attention to because you couldn't put question marks where you wanted to.
Yeah. Or just put a bunch of banks.
So why is the compare nullable but the comparison is not?
Because I believe that's actually correct. Hold on a sec.
But is it desirable? It seems like a very odd rule.
No, I think the comparer by default will use some default comparer versus the comparison you have to be very specific or something like that.
Well, the comparison is just the delegate version of the interface, right? So like there clearly is a default for that as well, right?
But the delegate can't.
We throw when the comparison is null.
No, I get that. All I'm saying is it feels very odd that one accepts null, the other one doesn't.
He's questioning the current behavior, not the annotation reflected.
Okay.
This is an example where I'm just, that seems odd. But this is something we would have never caught in a previous API review because I don't know what the code does.
There's structural comparable compared to and takes the I comparer, and I think that should be nullable.
Which one are you talking about, Krista?
The one which is grayed out in the second from the bottom.
Oh, I mean, you're saying that the compare should be nullable?
Yeah, I think so. That makes sense.
I think most of the implementations assume it's not.
Are you talking about these guys here?
Yeah, the grayed out.
I mean, it's possible we could say those are bugs, but like,
isn't that an example where the walker kind of, like, how would the walker even work if you don't have that?
like all the tuple implementations of iStructural comparable, they assume the compare is not null. They'll null ref if it is.
Or they don't even bother checking?
So, for example, in the one that in the iStructural equatable equals explicit implementation from array, we don't check if the compare is null. We could just null ref.
Be bold. Yeah, something is really weird in this tool. Like, I don't know what's going on. Seems like every reference type shows up as a div. Makes no sense.
Because it's right now non-nullable. It used to be maybe nullable.
What did we say about the difference between iComparer and comparison?
The annotations are correct.
According to the implementation.
Yeah. It's just a question of, do we like the behavior that's been there since, I think, .NET 2.0?
Yeah. To be fair, compare and comparison was never great. Because it's always this. Maybe added, I think, a method in 4.5 so you can actually construct a comparison from a comparer without writing the code yourself.
But it's like comparison is a delegate, right? In all the other places we take delegates, we don't accept null, right? Like predicate. When we take predicates, we don't take null there. So it kind of feels like that should be consistent with other delegate usages. So that if you want to make them consistent, the only way to make them consistent would be you can't take a null iComparer.
Which would be a massive breaking change.
Right, exactly. So I think we're good with the difference.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to change. Yeah.
Yeah, just write them up right now. We can review them separately, right? It just seems, look, now that we can actually see the question marks, it just strikes me as odd. It's all none of the super informed opinion.
Yeah, so in the struct right now.
And also, it doesn't make sense because, like, it doesn't matter much because there are explicit implementations, but they compare to equals and get hash code of array.
Yeah.
To no ref.
Probably 90% of the callers are also not passing in a value here, right? They're just having an inline lambda. All right, array segment. So as Stephen just said, we assume array can be null, even though we don't accept one. We can be constructed with one. So
yeah, this one's a little painful, but especially because like when you call a method that, like a try get method that has an array segment as an out, if it returns false, that array segment is generally a default array segment. If you try to access its array, it's going to be null. So this one felt like we had to make the array return a nullable, even though most of the time you try and actually access the array, it won't be.
what are we doing in operator equals? We don't blow up, right?
Right. In general, all of our equals methods do all the necessary checks to either to do null comparison or to factor in null comparison as part of the operation.
In all the methods we have on array segment, does any of them null ref when the array is actually null?
I think that used to be the case. I feel like we've had some bugs and they've been fixed. I believe at this point, nothing will null ref if you give it a default array segment.
which makes me feel like it should be nullable because it fixed bugs. You would have catched the bugs earlier if you have this.
Yeah. What are we declaring the field? Probably under as nullable, right?
Sorry, what are you asking? How the field in array segment is
Yeah.
declared? Yeah, it's declared as nullable.
Yeah. So that would have caught these bugs.
What's the reason that currently in the implementation the underlying array in array segment can be null?
Because, sorry, Victor, what was the question?
The backing array field in array segment is currently marked as can be null. What's the reason for that?
Default of array segment.
Yeah. So you mean it's a T array question mark? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, because you can say default array segment of T. And
So you always have a parameterless constructor.
That's right.
Yeah, and we have APIs that.
Yeah, it's one of those special stuff.
We have APIs that will pass an array segment as an out, like try get memory stream dot try get array or try get buffer.
Yeah.
And if it returns false, that array segment was initialized to default of array. Is going to be null.
That makes the whole implementation harder, right?
You mean anyone using array?
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean implementation in the BCL because now you have to apply a lot of bangs.
Yeah, there are a bunch of places we have to use.
Okay.
It's one of those cases where we were talking about earlier, where we're exposing it accurately. It can be null, yeah. But the majority of the time it won't be.
Okay.
And one of the things we talked about as a potential attribute was some way to express for so we're adding a not null when attribute where you can put it on one of these out parameters and basically say, if this function returns true, this will not be null, which works great for reference parameters. But for something like array segment where it's a struct that wraps a reference type, we don't have a good way of expressing that. And so for this release, that you're going to get warnings.
Okay.
Yeah, this one was painful.
Get custom attributes always return array. I mean, like it cannot return null.
In worst case, returns an empty array. Is this for?
Yeah, the get custom attribute singular can return null.
Yeah,
but the plural cannot because it's array empty, I think. As I remember.
Yeah, this question. We always return an empty array.
I think I've checked this particular case and I think it was correct, but it was a while ago. So
I would generally say that's also what we should do. We should never return null collections. We should always, worst case, return an empty one.
Why?
Because otherwise, it's very easy to make the mistake of saying you just for each over that. Like nobody ever expects a collection to be null.
Yeah, I mean, like get custom attribute the singular one can return the null. I mean, so you can
but you ask for a specific attribute and you don't have it, so it basically means no presence. But versus the array, you want a list of attributes which match certain criteria, and in that case the list is empty.
Yeah. In fact, I think we have explicit guidelines that says don't return null collections. Because native code has very drastically different behaviors, and it's a very bug prone. Is defined, and they all kind of match what I would think.
Can I ask one more general question?
Sure.
Regarding binary serialization here, have you thought about the cases where you serialize something, and something can be null, but you wouldn't expect it to be null because you could modify the payload, or on .NET Framework it's different?
Yeah, so generally the case is the same as you put a bank and you just explicitly make it prose, or the same way you could call something by reflection and completely bypass the feature.
Okay.
So yeah, I think we for those kinds of things, we assume that either the implementation of the deserialization is going to balk at a bad payload,
Yeah.
Or as Christoph was saying, we basically say, you know what, that's just like using unsafe code to modify something. If the implementation's deserialization isn't validating that it was correct and you modified it using effectively unsafe code because you're modifying the payload, well, that's on you. Static analysis.
And also, that would actually help because if you know someone is tampering the payload and you get null reference exception, and you know your code should not be throwing null reference exception, you know something is wrong, and you should probably investigate either way.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay.
The other problem is everything is binary serializable, right? So we wouldn't be able
Not
to.
everything.
Well, virtually everything.
250 types.
Well, they are marked, but you can throw in any type you want. You just don't get really great behavior.
So in bad image format exception, the message follows return string.
So this is another one of those special cases where we had sort of a gray area, where in theory someone could override message on exceptions in general. Like it's a virtual method for virtuals. You could override it and return whatever you want, including null. But we looked through all of our exceptions, and none of them return null from message. And there's no point in returning null. You can always just return base.message or
So
whatever.
What happened if you created bad image exception object with null string, and you ask for the message after that?
You'll get the base message. But you will always get a non-null message even if you pass in a null message.
What's base message on exception? Is basically just an error occurred?
Yeah, it includes the name of the exception type.
Oh yeah, an error of type black or yeah.
So yeah, for bad image format exceptions specifically, if you pass in a null message, then it has its own internal message that it uses that may or may not incorporate the file name of the image in question. Anyhow, but this is one of those gray areas where for virtuals in general, we have this problem. In theory, every single virtual on every type that's not sealed should return nullable. But that wouldn't be particularly useful. And it's not really accurate because from an intent perspective, message should never return null. And across all the code we looked at, it never returns null. So we're sort of putting a stake in the ground saying, all right, message returns non-null. If you're returning null, that's on you, fix it. And yeah, so again, one of these judgment calls.
I think the question mark will be the most used character in all source code now.
Yeah.
I really do want to run an analyzer over corelib and see how many question marks we added.
Yeah.
and bangs. Like, it's a high number.
Yeah, I'm curious what the ratio between banks and question marks is. I'm pretty sure banks are like twice.
We have a lot of bangs. To be fair, we'll have many fewer once we get these attributes, in particular the does not throw attribute, because right now, pretty much every public API we have has at least one bang per parameter.
The big bang for the buck.
Oh, bunch.
It's a big bang for you.
Did you ever cross-check, like, across, like, for example, is all try parse accepting a null string?
I'm not sure we've done that analysis, but in general, yes.
Because I'm pretty sure I ran into issues where some would throw and some wouldn't.
If I remember correctly, in general, on all the primitive types, parse does not accept null, but try parse does.
Do we return just false at the time?
Yeah. I know about Santi and Christoph and Booyah and Tanner and others who worked on this stuff, but when I was going through and annotating stuff and I came to a type like date time, it was such a relief that there were no reference types anywhere to be found.
Oh yeah, just add the nullable enable at the top.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And
There's
you're
just this
done.
big sigh of relief, like,
Yeah.
nothing to do.
This is why we are not deprecating it.
Exactly. Much of a good feeling.
I'm really glad we replaced string brackets with string brackets.
Yeah.
That was a good change, yeah.
String question mark, array question mark.
Yeah, I hate how that looks.
Which is good because you should never do it.
My least favorite, though, is bang foo bang, which means not foo suppressed warnings related to this.
Oh yeah.
Literally surrounded by bangs.
When I was doing the work to teach an API for Nullable, I came with such weird test cases. It looked really, really ugly. Like a dictionary that could take tuples that had tuples that could be nullable, that could have nullable types, and then the dictionary could be nullable.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the Roslin nullable reference types test. It's 100,000 lines of stuff like that. And they also gave up. Like the unit test methods eventually just have numbers. Like, yeah, whatever. Test case 1 to E48. I'm just trying to write down some general conventions, like for example, try parse should always be nullable or should always accept nullable. iPhone provider should probably always be nullable. Because those are things you can easily spot check, right? Almost regex style.
Yeah, all this reflection stuff is another area where people are going to have a ton of warnings because we have no idea what you're going to invoke and whether it can return null or not. So we basically always have to say it can return null.
The create delegate, if the target is null, doesn't that mean like a static method?
Sorry, what are you referring
The
to?
create delegate, when the target is null, doesn't that mean static?
Yeah.
So why is this not nullable?
Yeah, shouldn't that be nullable?
That's a good question. No one actually calls that code. No one constructs delegates explicitly, so it probably should be question mark, but it's not going to impact anyone.
Yeah, I don't think you can even derive from delegate in C#. I think they block that.
we should probably be accurate. So I think you're right that first line should probably be object question mark target, but
Yeah.
I don't think it can affect anyone.
Well, I guess it's the second one you're supposed to call, right?
Well, sorry, I mean you won't use any of those protected constructors ever.
So what I'm saying, probably the intent was this is for an instance method, this is for a static method.
I have no idea. I mean, I've never used it.
Possibly that's
The create delegates one that return nullable is because of the throw on bind failure parameter, right?
Yeah, because we don't have the ability to say this will be null. This could be null if and only if throw and bind failure is true.
Yeah. But we can now, right?
Right.
With the attribute. I mean, unless you make it a condition, which we can't.
But so if you look at the first overload of create delegate compared to the second one, the first one just calls the second one with throw and bind failure true, right. And that's why the first one doesn't return a nullable delegate.
Right.
The second one, which takes the option of having throw and bind failure be false, needs to be able to return null.
Can we express it without banging today? Probably not, right?
No, we would need an attribute that allows you to basically say, we're adding a not null when attribute.
Yeah.
We would need like the result. We have a not null when that refers to the return value. We would need a not null when that refers to a parameter. So you would say return not null when parameter name throw on bind failure is true.
Right. But you also couldn't express the fact that it will throw, like it will never return when this thing is true, right? And an error occurs.
Right. That's what I was. Yeah, that's what I was saying. You need more expressiveness than we currently have.
But it seems also fine. Like I mean, it sucks for the person implementing this overload here, but that also is, I think, a good example where you just have to say, I know better than the type system.
The first overload of combine above is another one of those cases where we're going to have an attribute that'll help us. If the compiler can see that either input delegate is non-null, then it'll know that the result is not null as well. But we don't have the ability to do the same for the second combine overload, because we don't have the ability to say if any of the params coming in is non-null, then the result will be non-null. So if you pass in a non-null as the first argument and a null as the second argument, the compiler will know the result is non-null. If you then add one more null to your argument list, it won't know whether the result is null or not.
That's funny. Okay, always throw more attribute in it.
Or we can add overloads. From 16 delegates.
And then you're taking 17, we're like you should do something differently. I don't know what it is, but whatever you're doing right now, you should probably do it.
You're gonna be grabbing for the iFormat provider, right?
Yeah, all the things that are here, I will just do a spot check.
Can you remind me in what situation exceptions stack trace can be null?
Out of stack. I think it's probably null right after you constructed one, right? Where do you see it, by the way?
Just 2 lines above the red and green.
Oh yeah. Well, I think if you say new exception, it's going to be null, right? You have to actually throw it to get a stack trace.
Oh, right, it'll be okay.
But that goes also back to who
Oh,
does
that's
that.
right. Yeah, I had to throw in binary format to get a valid stack trace to serialize it. Yeah.
Throwing and catching them.
Yeah.
Just or you cannot assign it.
Yeah. This seems also on the realm of the we want this.
It happens. Not a bit non-nullable after throw.
Yeah, you're right. I just tried it. New exception dot stack trace equals null.
Yeah.
This seems something where maybe empty string is actually the better answer.
Yeah, that's what I thought it returned, but
Because quite frankly, like, why should everybody who does it now have to check for null? Especially the default has a valid answer.
Not common to and stack is there. Usually just do to string or something.
Fair enough, still, though it seems weird.
I mean, in truth, a lot of these string returning methods that are diagnostic, you just pass them to something else that prints it out, debug assert or a console.write line, and all of them accept string question mark and ignore nulls. So in most of these cases, it doesn't really matter, but it could.
So with those annotations, is it possible to mark it so that it would not cause an error if you're in a certain scope, like in a catch statement?
We don't have the ability to do that. I mean, it could be special case by the compiler.
And you can say debug assert if something is not null, and then after that, compiler will ignore it.
The problem is it will break very quickly, right? All you have to do is do a refactoring where the creation and the access is in different methods, and the compiler would now assume it's not null because, well, you didn't create it, right? Got it.
I mean, it's possible we'll start to find. I don't think that was going to be particularly problematic. It's possible that after we ship and people start using it in earnest, that we'll start to find things where either we decide we need new attributes to express something, or the compiler needs to special case something. There are already a couple places the compiler is likely going to special case, like interlock, compare, exchange, equality, things that are difficult to express with attributes and very kind of complicated rules, but the compiler might special case. So we might find something like that would need to be added to the list.
So we didn't add any functions or actions that are marked with nullables, right? Because that would be
they're all generic.
Combinatorial. Well, I'm saying we didn't add like a span action kind of thing where we have a nullable anywhere, right?
No, but I mean all of our actions and functions accept and output generic, so there's nothing to annotate.
Yeah, we would have to specify the actual T. That's true. Well, we could constrain it. But what happens if we constrain the T to be object? We still can't, right?
We wouldn't want to do that because we want people to be able to use nullables as their arguments.
Yeah, I'm not saying changing those. What I'm saying is, like, in span action, we added a new delegate type to just be able to express that, right?
Saying add action in func. Well, it would be difficult to do because you can't overload on nullability. But we would, need to come up with some other signature that didn't conflict with these, and in order to be able to say these will never be null. We didn't do that. I guess we can look at it in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I also think it's probably better just from a combinatorial standpoint, because you can have like ins and reference types like intertwined, right? That will probably be not good.
But I mean, if you have a method foo, a generic method like foo of t, and you take a func of t, and then in your foo of t you add a constraint where t : class, for example, you're effectively saying I only accept a func of t that will never return a null.
Right.
Because the constraint will end up applying to the delegate as well.
Right.
So GC keep alive can take null?
It can. It doesn't make much sense. So this is a place where we could choose to say, well, the intent is you don't pass null here. If you're passing null, you're probably doing something wrong. But GC keep alive doesn't actually do anything other than serve as a marker to say, like, basically keep this thing rooted by the stack.
And it cannot accept null for suppress finalize at the same time?
Suppress finalize actually throws if null is taken because it actually has to modify. You know, it has to kind of touch the object itself.
Keep alive is the same.
Well, no, keep alive has nothing to do with anything on the object itself. Keep alive just says pretend this thing is still rooted. Suppress finalize actually has to go into the object and mutate it.
Right, but GC will mark something inside the object itself. Keep alive. Right?
Not for keep alive.
I think the idea is that because you call a method on the stack low, logically the thing is still in use. I think the method does nothing. Like the only thing that matters is that it's never get inline or anything like this. It's just basically
just referencing it.
Yeah, so just so you reference the thing.
Yeah.
So
that said, a call to gc.keepalive null is useless. So, I mean, we could choose to say this doesn't make any sense accepting a null, even though it's perfectly happy accepting null. And that's that's one of those judgment calls. I'm totally fine with that if people want to do that.
I think we're trying to represent the intent, right? So I think the intent makes sense to make it non-null in this case.
Right.
Yeah, to me, it's
because the intent of using keep alive is to keep an object alive, right? And you cannot keep null alive.
Yeah, thinking about it,
so
like
a boxed int, like nullable int. I'm not sure what's even gonna happen. So.
Oh, int?
Yeah, if you have a nullable int, box it.
If you had an int question mark a equals null, and then you did gc keep alive a, that would end up calling gc keep alive with null.
True.
But I don't know that that's. I mean, that would be weird.
But can you call suppress finalize on same object like this?
You could throw null.
Well, I mean,
it would throw argument null.
Int doesn't have a finalizer, so.
Right.
You probably should. Anyway.
Okay, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Let's move.
Turns out ints are not that expensive. Aha! See, try parse does not accept nullable.
Yeah.
That's probably
should. It polythrows, would be my guess.
Interestingly, try parse exactly.
That one actually should be nullable.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, we don't throw. We just say the result is default and return false.
Okay.
Try parse exact.
My favorite case for the nullable is when you add null with the empty string. It returns non-null, which is
Fixing it now.
or like null string plus null string. So like empty string. It's like what the heck.
That is a lot of APIs.
Almost a third.
Yeah. We looked at it. System runtime and runtime extensions cover half of what we need to review.
Which is good, which also means it's not that bad. You don't go through everything tonight. Today. No, I have plans to review APIs with you later today. Will be a bad Friday party.
Be fun party. Although the annotations might not be completely accurate.
Well, as long as you have a funny game of shots that involves every time somebody finds a bug we all drink, that could be a fun party. It might get progressively harder to drink though, which might actually be good too.
I just tried changing the GC Keep Alive thing, and it ends up producing about 10 warnings across core lib. Not because we're explicitly passing null, but because we're passing something the compiler can't prove is non-null.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So that kind of raises the question whether it's a good idea to annotate or not, because there's no harm, no foul in leaving it nullable.
Right. No, this is one of those areas where I think intent is also less important, right? Basically, your intent is I want to keep this alive if it's not null, and if it's null, well, then I guess it doesn't matter whether it's alive or not.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, if you call it with null, it's just odd, but I think anybody in the code review would say, what exactly are you trying to achieve here? In 64. I'm very happy that we didn't do nullable pointers. That would be really ugly to look at.
I was going to wonder about
The master by ref object is get lifetime service always non-null?
Which one again?
Master by ref object. Like, we don't support remoting. Do we actually return anything meaningful here? I think we probably return null, would be my guess. Probably a runtime call or something like that. But
Currently, we throw in platform not supported exception.
so technically, we return nothing.
So technically, it's not nullable. It won't return null.
That's awesome. Never mind then. I guess same is true for initialized lifetime service then. A memorized clone. The heck is the signature byte array on a missing member exception? Is that the
The
metadata?
signature of the member?
Is that basically the metadata representation of the signature? Seems very odd.
Module handle, empty handle. This is structure.
Yeah, it's oh, primitives are funny. Offending number. I cannot see it. Let's see. That's the problem with these book reviews. Usually you have. What's the object name property on the object dispose exception level when the constructor takes the
It returns string.empty if it's null.
Why object toString is returning null? No, in other classes, I mean, like, we don't return null.
Oh, we had about a 10-hour discussion.
Yeah, okay.
Do you want to go over it, Steve?
And the short answer is we have a lot of disagreements about it. And while the base object.toString will never return null, and while in theory no one should ever return null, people do.
Usually by accident, but there's too many of them, I believe.
But this will not create a lot of warnings for people using.
It would only create it if you call it directly an object.
Yeah, so the theory that we're operating under, and we could be wrong, is that there actually won't be all that many warnings, because in general, either you're calling toString on a specific, you have a variable of a specific type, and when you override toString, you can constrain it further. So most overrides of toString return string, not string question mark. And so if you had a type and you wanted to, say, parse the result of toString, there's a really good chance that it's not actually returning string question mark, it's returning string. If you have object and you're calling toString, you're probably not parsing it, you're probably passing it to something else to work with. You're passing it to string concat, you're passing it to console write line, you're passing it to whatever, all of which accept string question mark. So you're probably not going to get warnings there either. So the places where you get warnings, and there are some, are limited.
The class above the object dispose exception has the toString and it's virtual, right? Should
That's
be
object.
override?
That's object.
Oh, okay, makes sense.
It has to be virtual somewhere.
I was like, exception. I was like, okay. Visual class.
Look at this beautiful tuple here. Doesn't it read nice?
Yeah, I like it.
The capital O, capital L really sells it. Oh boy. And I think does not help at all.
I think I know why it is.
Yeah, you think it's the attributes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not
Because
sure.
I changed the way that that Gen
possible.
API writes the types now.
I thought like if you basically remove attributes, it should not return the diff here because I filtered them out, right? Otherwise, they would render. So. Oh. Hold on.
Which one?
Return the span, returns a string. Right.
What was your question?
String to string?
Yeah.
In read-only span?
Yeah.
I think we return a string empty.
You get a compiler.
Still in
Is it the
system?
generic one?
Yes.
If you return null, you would get the compiler. Really easy to spell.
We do.
Oh,
There are two files, read-only span and read-only span fast.
That is.
There's no reason that we have to.
Steven, what's the reason that runtime type handle has a non-null
We call
left?
a string format.
It has a what?
Like on my cursor, why is left marked non-nullable? Seems odd.
Because
You are
String format exception.
You should just return false.
it's wrong. It should accept question mark.
Yeah.
Which one? The runtime handle?
Runtime type handle, the comparisons.
All the object arguments and all of the operator equals and not equals.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll add them to my PR.
It's also a struct, so technically speaking.
Well, I mean, accepts an object, right? That's because the compiler can't prove that it's not null. Should not give you a warning, right? I mean, worst case, it returns false at runtime, so.
Left and right, right?
I added a rule that we should say anything that takes any operator equals not equal should accept nullable.
I get nervous now anytime you scroll up to things where try parse is about to be on the screen.
You made a promise, Steven.
I know. Yes.
Okay.
Have like a compiler analyzer go through try parse and make sure that the
Yeah, we probably should add some rules to this. Like that would be good. Actually, any API rules are super easy to write too, because I don't have to look at the code. You just have to look at the symbols. Really, concat does not accept a null enumerable. That's odd. Normally, we eat all nulls, right?
so compare can take null string because it takes index and
yeah.
Why not?
because it takes index and passing null
I think
and index like something.
I think it throws if the index is non-zero and the string is zero is null. But I can look.
Although these are the attributes. Also, we don't accept the null culture info. But culture can usually be null too.
Sorry, where are you looking?
The culture info one. Isn't culture info normally also considered nullable?
Oh, for the compare?
I thought we default to whatever the behavior is usually current. Sometimes
It might be that like if you use the
that actually does throw if it's null.
interesting.
it's probably because there is an overload which doesn't take it and you should use it.
It's usually a format provider where we allow it to be null. It's rare that we actually take culture explicitly.
Oh, that's why I'm thinking this. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, Tarek, in the
No, it doesn't make sense to pass I format here because we need to get a compare info from it. I mean, so I format doesn't. I mean, if you pass like date time format info, it doesn't make
No,
sense.
I know. I'm saying that I think what Emo was thinking of was for methods that take an I format provider, we almost always allow it to be null. We're always allowed to be null.
Right.
But this is different. This is taking a culture.
Yeah.
And then so are we done with this one? Are we in agreement that this looks right?
yeah, I just looked at the code, and if any of the strings are null, we consider its length to be 0, and then we do an index comparison against that length to make sure it is right. And so if the index is greater than 0, then we would throw.
Sticky keys.
Anyone ever press yes about?
Probably by accident.
Accidentally.
And you ask about enumerable values.
Yeah,
In the
like
concat, we throw for that if it is null.
Okay.
We throw if the values is null.
Yeah,
We allow what it contains to be non-null. I'm sorry, to be null.
Yep.
Like if the enumerables enumerators concurrent returns null, that's fine.
And the concat, what just take two strings? I mean, is it accept null also?
Yes, if you add a null string plus null string, it will return. It will be string that empty. Doesn't make sense, but it's.
well, least doesn't return not a number. I mean,
It's not a number.
so you're saying it should return not a number?
It's super convenient that concat allows null to be translated into string.empty. It's weird to do two nulls, but it kind of logically falls out of it.
And that will help also with the object to string warnings.
Exactly. I think with Santi, is it string.concat object arg0 that you recently fixed?
Concat object.
There was an issue with I feel like didn't you change that to return string empty rather than null ref or something? Or
Yes.
return null?
Yeah, I changed one of those.
I think that was like the one of maybe two changes that we made to make the annotations what we wanted them to be.
Let me find it.
Yeah, we don't have to block on it. I'm just curious.
Yeah, something is odd here. Oh no, never mind. Never mind.
What is internal return? I mean,
Yeah, that sounds like a bool to me. It's like, is in turn true, false.
yeah.
Why would it return null?
I think if it's not interned, it'll return null. If it is, it'll return the interned version.
I was just saying, if it is not interned, it returns null, and if it is interned, it returns the intern representation.
I believe that's what it does.
And then sometime it cannot.
That's a great API.
Yeah, returns. The docs say returns a reference to string if it is in the common language runtime intern pool, otherwise null.
But intern method cannot accept null.
Yeah, it sounds like this is the conditional version of this one. So this one basically says, if it is intern, give me the intern representation, but don't add it to the intern thing, right? This one would either give you the intern representation or add it to the intern list.
Correct.
So the scenario makes sense. The API is just bad. I'm glad that it's not an empty text and not a string.
Pretty useless if it didn't.
The join does not allow the elements to be null? That seems odd, considering that for object we accept it with null.
Which join?
So these guys accept nullables.
Sorry, which one are you looking at?
But these guys do. This guy does not.
Oh, the enumerable one?
Yeah.
That might be a mistake. Dot join of enumerable of string. That's a bug.
That's a mistake.
That should be string question mark.
Yep.
Good.
Adding it to my PR.
I don't think we can join.
Wait, Stephen, do you know how covariance and contravariance works with nullable? Is that
That's how it's supposed to work once the bugs are fixed.
okay? So it will be that string question mark.
It should work the way you expect it to work. If you have a base, a parameter on a base virtual that accepts string, you should be able to override it to accept string question mark.
Okay.
If you have a return value that returns string question mark, you should be able to override it to return string.
But that also goes to casting of generics, right?
In what way?
So if I have a method that accepts an enumerable of nullable, of object nullable, object question mark, sorry. Can I pass in an enumerable of string? No question mark?
Yeah, you should be able to.
Yeah.
It's possible that doesn't work right now.
What does it mean to split on a null separator array?
I believe it uses either a space or all white space. A null separator array. Yeah, it treats all white space as separators.
But why is it nullable? That seems odd, no?
Well, it's basically how you say, like, passing in an array of every known white space character.
You cannot default it to.
Oh, because I keep forgetting that the char array and the string one are not the same.
Replace different culture info nullable here.
Which one?
Yeah, the replace with patch uniform. The longest replace.
Yeah, one up.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, I'm not seeing it. What's
So
inconsistent?
this one here.
The
Why does it
re-
accept the nullable
Replace
function?
with the longest overload.
You're talking about the culture?
The one you just selected on the.
Yeah.
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 In other place, yeah, culture was not nullable, but here it's not.
Do you remember the other API?
It was compare, I believe.
String compare.
Yeah. What was the string compare?
Yeah, this one uses current culture if culture is null.
Yep.
And to Ipo's point earlier, it kind of highlights how having this in the API makes it easier to spot differences like that.
Yep.
Perhaps we should change the other one to also do this.
Be breaking chain.
Well, accepting more is never a breaking change, right? If you have not accepted null, it's safe to accept now. I mean, if you have code that relies on an argument null exception, then you should change something in your code. It's not.
Or your philosophy in life.
I saw people depend on that before.
Yep. But my core, the answer is, dude, you're holding it wrong.
So should we change the other one? Or?
Yeah, like I have it already listed here.
Oh,
somewhere.
okay.
No, actually I didn't because of the iPhone provider comment. Let me actually add this. So reset string compare.
Doesn't accept culture input.
Doesn't accept. Culture, but it does.
Too lower is the same.
Yeah, to lower doesn't accept.
To lower, arguable because there is an overload which doesn't take any.
Right. Give us an answer.
I don't care.
Yeah, to lower empty uses current culture.
Invariant.
To upper also doesn't accept.
The one thing that I don't like with this room is I have no way of checking what's next in this room. Like you would think that's a core scenario, right?
Report the problem.
You report a problem.
Outside, you can check.
Because if there's no meeting at 12,
I have to leave anyway.
so we should at least try to. Oh yeah, that's great. No, the VSX editor from Dev10 does not like high DPI. I can tell you that.
Finish the string.
Yeah, let's finish string at least, and then we can.
Yeah.
That's a good ending.
There's nothing at 12.
Yeah, but it seems like enough people have to leave.
Pocket, yeah.
I did it breakfast.
No, you can pocket. Right?
Yeah. Did you annotate to upper?
I already wrote it down. Yeah.
Okay.
To chare, to upper something.
Anything on string which takes culture.
Yeah.
Should be consistent.
Looks fine. All right, so then we're done with string, which is at least, I think, 2/3 of the system namespace, which is the big hitter, and then from there on it's a bit easier, except for reflection, that's the big one, and tasks. That's pretty much it.
Thank you.
All right.
Don't forget where we should start on the next meeting.
You want to do it Tuesday or?
Yeah, I need to book. I need to ask around whether anybody has something short that they need to get unblocked by, and then either we spend the second hour, but there's also another API review that the WinForms guys asked me to do, so I probably have to set it on another meeting. I don't think we get away with just the Tuesday next week. Alrighty. Things online.
Thanks, guys.
Also, it could probably help. So I have this